Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Ospet. We should be starting in 6 minutes time. So I think there are more people that are going to be joining us. There are more people that are going to be joining us. So thank you very much. Just hang in there. Good afternoon, everyone. We should be starting in a few minutes time. Thank you very much for joining us. We should be starting shortly. So just hang in there. Thank you very much for joining us. We should be starting shortly in a few minutes time. We should be starting in a few minutes time. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We should be starting shortly in a few minutes time. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We should be starting shortly in a few minutes time. We should be starting in a few minutes time. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. We should be starting in a few minutes time. We should be starting shortly. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. for our Sociology Tuesday research seminar. We do this almost on a weekly basis, and this is our last session for the semester. So we are quite honored to have Dr. Kolofelo Moeng, who is going to be presenting to us on a very interesting and important topic. So let me quickly introduce our speaker today, who is going to be leading the conversation. So Dr. Kolofelo Moeng holds a PhD in development studies and is a lecturer in the Department of Development Studies at the University of South Africa, where she has served for over 14 years. She's driven by a commitment to inclusive, critical, and transformative education. And Dr. Moeng approaches teaching as a liberatory practice, and her philosophy centers on empowering students with the intellectual tools to question injustice, challenge marginalization, and amplify silenced voices. Through innovative and forward-thinking pedagogies, she aims to transform both individual lives and broader social meaningful change. Her research centers on the energy transition discourse with a strong focus on the social and environmental justice dimensions of the shift towards low carbon economy. So it's a pleasure to have Dr. Moeng, who is going to be leading our conversation today. So without further ado, let me allow Doc to get us started. Just let me know if you are able to share. Sorry about that. Let me quickly check. Let me quickly check and address that. Sorry for that. So just give me a minute. Yeah, can you try and see if it's working now?
Thank you. I think it is working now. Let me just do it quickly.
All right.
You let me know if we are good on your side.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, colleagues, for having me. I am really excited and very much privileged to be here today. Please pardon me, I'm not going to switch on my camera. I'm very compromised. I'm working in a very compromising space. So please just bear with me on that. Colleagues, a very good afternoon to you all. My name is Kolofelo Moeng. Like my colleague has already introduced me, I am a lecturer in the Department of Development Studies. And yes, I've been there for over a decade now. And I am a social scientist, but a social scientist who's interested in very funny things. Um, so now my very interesting focus is the energy transition, which is a shift from the fossil energy as we have come to be acquainted with to renewable and cleaner energy technologies. This is a very common, very I think over the years there's been a lot of talks around the energy transition, and most of us know, and we've tried engaging with what the energy transition means, what it means for us as academics, what it means for industries, what it means for policymakers, what it means for government, but more especially what it means for communities that have built their lives and their livelihoods around the coal landscape. Because if engage with some of the debates further, you see how the emphasis is moving away from the fossil energy that has powered our economy towards cleaner and greener renewable energy models. And some of the debates that have emerged there relates to the capitalist nature of that model and the political agendas that underpin it. And that is why I decided to frame my talk around reframing the energy transition. And I think as I go on, I will articulate why we need to reframe it and why now I'm framing it from a context of a capitalist and political agenda, and the endeavor to reframe it towards a more transformative social and environmental justice. So let me just maximize my screen. Um, okay, I'm not, there we go. Awesome. So, colleagues, just a brief background on the just transition for those who are not too acquainted with it. So, a lot of us, we are very familiar with the just energy transition, but the just energy transition is just a component of the just transition. The just transition is actually the bigger framework that governs or that dictates the shift, which have all obviously been dictated by the climate change, which has sparked widespread debate around what the current production and consumption methods have contributed to the greenhouse emissions, and how they have caused many other things that we are battling with today as society. And as a result, the conversation has sparked a widespread debate and reflection on how then do we move from the unsustainable patterns of production and consumption that are said to be threatening our humanity and the planet, of course, and then move towards models that are cleaner, towards achieving a low carbon, climate resilient economy. And I know as social scientists, every time we engage with issues of climate change, there are other very interesting debates that come up, which I hope we'll be able to engage with them during the Q&A. So the just transition, it's not a new concept. Actually, it started much earlier in the early 90s. It started, it emerged through workers or labor unions, whereby the unions made a decision that actually there is a need to move away from harmful industries to create environments that are more conducive for people to work in. And if you trace it back to, for example, concepts like environmental racism, and then you see how that links it very well with the debates around how very toxic factories or industries would be strategically located near people of color or Black people. And as a result, they would suffer more from the externalities that are arising from those industries to their detriment, but also they would become dependent on these factories. So as a result of all of that environmental racism, which later evolved to environmental justice, then there was that question around how then do we move away from the current way of doing things, but at an industry level. And the conversation over time evolved. And later on, we see the conversation coming to the 2015 Paris Agreement under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, whereby countries like South Africa also ratified themselves in that process, and they submitted what we call their national determined commitments to say they also are positioning themselves in the heart of the transition, which is then a shift from the way that we are doing production, the way that we are doing consumption towards what is more cleaner, what is more acceptable, what is more sustainable. But in that bigger framework or bigger conversation, one of the key issues or the key components that emerged was around the energy, because energy is one of the highly polluting sectors in the whole in the global economy. So then that is why then the just transition became insufficient if we just look at it as just a move to low carbon economy. It had to be well defined within the context of energy. And that's why today we have concepts like just energy transition, which has become the buzzword. I think every time you hear conversation about the G20, the energy transition keeps popping up. Every time we listen to our energy minister, he talks about the just energy transition. Every time we listen to the politics about ESCOM, what is happening in ESCOM, the debundling of ESCOM, the buzzword there or the central theme there that is cutting through all these debates and politics about energy is the just energy transition, because that is how the decarbonization process of our country and other countries, of course, is pursued. So this involves a process of a systematic shift from carbon-intensive models of production and consumption in the energy space towards what is considered sustainable pathways that are aimed at reducing global carbon emission footprint. So now this is our era. We are in a new era, a new era that is characterized by a shift from the fossil generated energy. Fossil generated energy is what we are using. It's what has powered South Africa and the whole global economy or global society in terms of energy. And that has been dependent on coal energy. In the context of South Africa, when we talk about coal, I think one of the most key places our energy hub would be the Mpumalanga coal field, because then it houses around 80% of our coal-fired plants, coal mines, and then you go down to the other provinces, but Mpumalanga province remains the central area, which we consider our energy hub. So the shift then is prompting a shift from the fossil energy that is generated from coal towards what is considered clean and renewable energy. And that would talk to your solar energy, that would talk to, now there's a nice debate that is emerging around nuclear energy and your gas and your wind power and many other methods that I think over the years we'll see many evolving. Your battery storages, your lithium battery storages, and many others. But the essence of it all is achieving sustainability, which we have defined as the ability to preserve what we have today so that we don't compromise the future generation because of our bad or irresponsible production and consumption. So we are striving to achieve what has been termed a low carbon economy. Colleagues, okay. So if you engage with the just energy transition, as a social scientist like myself, I have to obviously engage with the historical context of to understand where all these things began, because then without history we are not able to make the right or informed decisions about where we are supposed to go. A lot of scholars have argued that this constitutes one of the most significant transitions in the history of South Africa. Some compare it to the transition from apartheid to Democratic Republic of South Africa. And this also is one of those significant transitions. And unfortunately, if we do it wrong, one scholar argues that it would be worse than apartheid, because then we are removing people from a life and livelihoods that they've built, a life that they've been acquainted to, because of a concept that could possibly be abstract to them. And I'm going to give an example of what I'm trying to say here. If you think about somebody who has settled in the Mpumalanga coalfields all their lives, who has built a life, they've built livelihoods around that coal economy. And now, because of a climate change concept that is very abstract to them, we need to shift that whole economy. We have to make some significant reforms. Actually, that because then these people have been they over time they've had to acquaint themselves as this is our land, this is our economy, this they even have that custodianship over coal, and then shifting that, you're not only breaking social ties, you're not, I mean, social fabrics, you're disrupting a whole lot of other things. That is why then it's very important to then go back to the history to understand the coal economy. And in the South African context, to do that effectively, we then have to engage with the minerals energy complex. The mineral energy complex, it gives us a very comprehensive history about the coal landscape of our country. And some of the things that emerge when you engage with the minerals energy complex is, for example, my favorite, the subordinate position of coal generated energy. The MEC, which is the mineral energy complex, reveals that even in the first place, coal combustion or coal generated energy was not necessarily for powering the economy. It was meant for mining. So coal mining assumed a subordinate position to gold mining. So you see how there are superpowers that have always controlled that whole economy, and as a result, and then they needed some form of cheap in energy, which will be achieved at low production cost in order to power the gold sector. And as a result, because of how the structure was how it was, everything was structured, and then we see how there were issues like what Munich would talk to a migrant labor system that was very central in that mining economy, and also a compound system, which scholars like Clark explain that it cultivated a culture of migrant labors and a compound system to house the miners that had to come. In the Marxist term, we talk about the proletariat and the capitalism, and scholars like Maseko engage deeper into that and talk about how the historical compound system that housed black males, mine workers, how it was controlled, how it was a single sex compound with restricted movement and interaction. So they bringing in the social ills that actually constituted this system that was within that mining sector. And also over time, scholars like Koch have spoken to how that very migrant labor system resulted in the informal settlement. I think if you go into the Mpumalanga area or the coal field, the coal belt, you see how there's a lot of informal settlement along that belt because of the coal mining sector. And unfortunately, as much as the coal mining sector has given people the bread and the butter, but what it has done is it has frustrated or frustrated the social networks in that area. We saw over the years a lot of other issues emerging, social ills, HIV rates going up, and everything like what would happen in areas like Marikana, for example, and issues like of interconnected lives of interconnected issues, where we see how it's not just starting at a compound system where male blacks are housed and they have to leave their wives and their children back in the rural areas, but also there are issues of people that were residing there that had to be dispossessed. These are black people that had to be dispossessed for to make way for the mining economy, and in over and above being dispossessed of their ancestral lands, they had to suffer the imposition of externalities that were resulting from the mining. There's a very interesting book that Dr. Dineo Kosana wrote about no final resting place, because then some of these people were dispossessed, and then later on they were dispossessed again, and they had to do grave relocations. So the people then feel like it looks like there's no final resting place for us because you moved us from this place, and then now we settled here, we buried our people, and now you're coming again because you've discovered more coal. So these are some of the social issues that we need to understand when we talk about the coal landscape, and understanding and engaging with them positions us as social scientists to then engage with what a just transition is and what it should look like. So, as a social scientist again, as I looked at, as I engage with these issues, I always gravitate towards an interdisciplinary theoretical engagement, because then if you look at these issues, these are complex, multifaceted issues. They're very intertwined. They're very, some of them are very nuanced. So you need very strong theoretical lenses to engage with these issues. And before I engage, I took to the interdisciplinary theoretical lens. Let me talk a bit to what I have termed a paradoxical context. So as much as I have painted the picture from the previous slide, this one that I'm currently flighting, about what the coal landscape actually looks like and how it has been shaped and what has unfolded over time. But these communities have built their lives on the coal economy, and that is something that we need to understand very well. So as much as they are affected by the negative externalities, some of them were affected by the establishment of the coal economy in the first place. The affectedness has evolved over time. It has not gotten better because now we have issues of acid mine drainage and many other issues, like I mentioned, the social ills, prostitution, issues of prostitution, for example, it's very high. The issues around the health of the communities there is also very sophisticated, and it gets more sophisticated because then the mines, the local mines, they have to conduct certain tests for you to get an employment in the mines. So because the people have stayed in this locality for so long, they were affected by the air pollution, they were affected by the acidic water and many other issues that have resulted from the mining activity, the coal mining activities. They end up not even qualifying to be beneficiaries in the very mining economy that is happening in their province as a result. And then people from outside the province, from KwaZulu-Natal, from Zimbabwe, from other provinces, they come in and they are the beneficiaries because they get employed in that economy. So as much as they're affected, but they're dependent. There are those that have built livelihoods around the coal economy. I think if you look at this picture here, it shows a squatter settlement just outside one of the coal power stations there. You see, this community is very poor. Behind them, it's a power station. You see it's happening. Power is being produced, but they cannot even afford the power that is produced in their backyards. You see, they have a little generator there, but it cannot even sustain the energy. So what they end up happening, what end up happening is these communities would, for example, build livelihoods around the market. They would have in what you call it, informal trading, whereby they would sell food to the truck drivers, and some of them have actually managed to survive through that economy for the longest time. Some have been able to take their kids to school and so forth. So they've built a whole economy, and some of them, although they have wives back in KwaZulu-Natal, they have other wives here. So it's a whole social fabric that is very complicated but very interesting also. So it's very important to always apply that lens when you engage with how it's not just a matter of people I mean moving from one energy system to another, but there are other intricacies that we need to engage with. And then going back to the interdisciplinary theoretical lens, I'm a development studies practitioner, and obviously I would gravitate towards your dependency theory, for example. dependency theory, engaging with how Ndlovu talks to it. He explains that it provides a critical explanatory power for an understanding of the experiences that shape Africa, Latin America, and other former colony regions. My humble apologies, colleagues. Let me just put this on flight mode. And then scholars like Chase June explain they're justifying, because other scholars over time they've argued that perhaps the dependency theory has lost its grip, it has died. And Chase June is arguing that no, it's very much alive. And for us to understand the changing nature of the global power, it's not a task whose time has ended. So we still need, even when we engage with these complexities, we still need to understand how we link them to the global power. And as I engage further with the just transition and the issues of climate change, I will touch on the global power a bit. And then another theory that made a lot of makes a lot of sense every time I engage the energy transition is the socio-technical transition, which then helps you understand the dynamics that underpin a shift from one socio-technical system to another. And they have a middle theory within the STT, which is called the MLP, the multi-level perspective, which focuses on the multifocality and the radical changes that result from the novelties that happen in niches. I'll explain this, and the dynamic stability of regions and influences emanating from the landscape. So this theory gives us a vocabulary to understand what, in the context of South Africa's just energy transition, would talk to as landscape. The landscape would refer to the climate change debates, and how because of the climate change debates, a lot of things have to change. The regimes would talk about your ESCOM, for example. It's an existing regime that the novelties which are happening in the niches, which is the renewable energy, have to contend with the fossil energy that is produced by ESCOM. And that is why now you are hearing the minister would talk about beyond debundling, and then now they have to bring in renewable energy into the grid and in the IPP system, whereby there's going to be a tender process where privately owned energy would be brought into the grid, which would then ultimately result in us not having to depend so much on fossil energy, because then there would be wind power that is through the put into the grid. There would be solar energy, there would be nuclear energy. Now there's a very significant movement around gas, whereby they're talking about clean cooking. They are migrating poor communities who have depended on your bad biomass, who have depended on coal from artisanal miners for cooking and for heating, and therefore, and paraffin, obviously, because it's one of those fossils that it's being phased out. And then you understand how that has to compete with ESCOM and the politics that have happened around ESCOM. I just don't want to go into the politics, but also the funding issues and the many other issues that over time we've engaged with and we've come to understand. Another important theory is political ecology. It's very significant when you engage with the energy transition because of its deconstructive power. Its deconstructive lens allows you to engage with even those nuanced issues that are not really, you can't really put your finger on them if you just look at it from face value. But political ecology gives you the permission and the vocabulary and the ability to get into that and be deconstructive as you engage with the issues. And also it has a very strong decolonial lens, which then also, like Gacheni explains, it helps us understand the experiences that have shaped Mpumalanga province, for example, examples that would shape Kimberley, for example, if you're talking about other forms of mining. And then the last attribute that is very significant for engaging it, the emancipatory power, because we understand that they are people or communities or societies that have to be emancipated in the conversation. And I will explain why as I move to the next slide. So its relevance also is through its three theoretical perspective, which is actor-oriented power theories. The just energy transition is an multi-actor process. I'll talk to it in the next slide. It's not only one actor, it's a lot of actors that are involved in the energy transition, and also power perspectives. There's a lot of power issues, power dynamics that are at play within the just transition. It's not a matter of we are just moving from one system to another, but we are definitely battling power issues. And this could be power issues from the global north imposing on the global south. And then that's when then you'll hear for example, just to be controversial a bit, and then Trump coming with another narrative to say, actually, this renewable energy business, it's a host. So you see that how it's a lot of power dynamics, global power dynamics that actually are entrenched in the whole energy debate. And the last one is the discursive power perspective. The discursive power perspective would be the use of narratives. And one of those narratives in the context of South Africa is nobody will be left behind. And as social scientists, I just have to appeal to you. Let's then engage with what does it mean to leave nobody behind when we know that development models have the capacity and over the years have proven that they can leave the marginalized behind. So is it a narrative, or is it a commitment that now our government is saying we don't want to leave anybody behind? But then if you engage with that in the context of issues of corruption, for example, are we sure that we're not going to leave anybody behind? Who really are the winners and the losers in this whole transaction? So so based on all of that, which I have just articulated, based on what the different theories are giving us the ability to engage with, then I have concluded that the just transition is not just a shift from one energy model to another. It's a non-linear, very complex, multi-stakeholder process that is unfolding in a complex context. It is characterized by contestations and complex social, economic, and political dynamics. What do I mean by this? The nonlinearity, I'm engaging with the concept of the just transition in terms of how you cannot predict how it's going to unfold because there's a lot of voices. And if you followed how the debate has unfolded over time, you would have realized that there was a point where, just as an example, for this seminar, how Minister Gwede Mantashe and the president were just not agreeing on what the just transition should unfold. One was talking about a net zero emission, and while somebody was talking about augmenting the current, we are not phasing out coal. Narratives like we will transition when it is conducive for us as a country to transition. Those are some of the words that were uttered by Minister Mantashe, for example, while the president is setting up beautiful, excellent structures like the Presidential Climate Commission, who have developed a very brilliant model on how the just transition should unfold, what would happen when we phase out coal, and the mess ups that have already happened. If you look at, for example, Komati in the Mpumalanga province, where the Komati power station was repurposed, and as a result, people lost their jobs. Minister Mantashe warned that if this thing happened the way that it was planned to happen, we're gonna have ghost towns. And others we say we're not gonna have ghost towns, but now we sit with Komati, which has become a ghost town. People have lost their jobs. The situation there is bad, but now they're trying and rebuild the economy. So vested interest, which is the second component, there are a lot of stakeholders in this process, and some of them are in it for the financial gains. Some of them are in it for the political gains. So this multi stakeholders, they're very powerful. If you think about it, the business people, they need to benefit from the energy transition. The government also has its own stake. The global economy also has its own stake. And I'll just give an example of how the global economy has a significant stake in the transition. If you think about, for example, the green hydrogen, who stands to benefit from the green hydrogen? The European companies that have invested in that space. So that is why then it's not just community. So if you look at the communities, then perhaps we need to be honest to say, where are they in this whole barrel? Because then they are politicians, they are capitalists, businesses that how do you expect a community to for example, compete with a Sasol that is well established, have running systems. And then you look at the IPP model, which is a tendering process. For that model, at some point, you had to pay 25,000 rands just to bid. How do you expect somebody who has lost their livelihood, who has worked in the mine and now they don't have a job, for example, to bid with something that requires a 25,000? So it just shows that it's very complex and it's unfolding in a very complex context. There's a lot of volatility in terms of the geopolitics. Right now, especially with us hosting the G20, then we see who's coming, who's not coming, who's saying what, who's not saying what. I'm not going to complicate it further with, for example, what the debate around the critical mineral resources, which now give us a leverage point, for example, in the energy value chain. And the political dynamics have spoken to that. So the contestations also come to how even the departments, the national departments, would not necessarily agree, because then at some point the Department of Mineral Resources was in total contradiction with the Department of Environmental Affairs in terms of how the just transition should unfold. So those are some of the contradictions that are happening at a national level, and how then what do they mean when they trickle down to the local level? So this just constitutes very complex dynamics that then how do we expect then the poor, the marginalized, to then navigate that? Because then over time, all the systems have rendered them powerless, they've rendered them voiceless, and many other issues. So colleagues, um, so and I'm not saying that the framework is weak, because it is strong. It has a very significant, strong justice component, which is based on procedural justice. It considers the voice and the dignity and the respect of all actors. Distributive justice, which speaks of distribution costs and benefits that should be done equally, also not neglecting the vulnerable stakeholders. And also the restorative justice, which is premised on the empowerment, the socio-cultural restoration, and environmental restoration, because we understand that we cannot, if, for example, we are moving away from the coal energy, generated energy, we cannot afford to leave the Mpumalanga province as it is now. It is there's a lot of environmental degradation that has happened. We need to do a form of rehabilitation to make sure that the people would have a good environment and livable environment. However, I argue that those are not enough, because then even when we consider those the policy primers, they are inadequate if we consider the just energy transition in terms of the history that I've outlined and some of the nuanced issues and complexities that emerge as you engage with these issues on a deeper level. Therefore, I propose that we need to bring in a more deeper lens of social justice, and not social justice at face value, but social justice as we read, maybe, for example, the writings of Maseko. Maseko's, in his writing, he uses an epistemic method of shifting the geography of reasoning in order to read the experiences. In his writing, he talks to the experiences of Black miners, but for the purpose of this paper, I'll say the experiences of the poor in South Africa from the locus of enunciation of the marginalized subject, because these are the marginalized subjects who do not have access to the big rooms where these conversations are unfolding. And if I can just give one example, for example, every year we have the Africa Energy Indaba. Registration fee to just get into that conversation is almost 20,000 rand. So how do you expect somebody who is poor to get into that conversation. So we even make sure that even we don't create space for this marginalized to come. So if we shift our geography of reasoning to consider this marginalized within the scheme of colonial apartheid and the power differentiated based on the hierarchy of humanity. This is what Maseko is saying. So this forces us to go then deeper to say, actually, what would justice look like if we engage with social justice at an epistemic level like this one that is articulated by Maseko? Maseko goes further to connect the experiences of being Black, a Black mine worker, for example, to colonialism, capitalism, and subjugation. And if you think about that, if you go back to the picture that I've painted about coal communities in the Mpumalanga, you see that there's a lot, capitalism has taken over, there's a lot of subjugation, and he considered a realm of subhuman, because then perhaps they're not considered fully human, because then there's a lot of imposition, voicelessness that is happening in that space. And also, I argue that perhaps we need to move from what I've explained in the previous slide, which is environmental justice based on procedural, distributive, and restorative justice, to a more decolonial environmental justice. What then is a decolonial environmental justice? It's where we shift the epistemic limitation of environmental justice. We engage with the fact that environmental justice, it's a Latin American context, and it does not cater, or sometimes it neglects some of the realities of South Africans in a post-colonial landscape, which as a result, if we take it as is, as we found it from the Latin Americans, it potentially marginalizes some conceptual formulations, and as a result produce new injustices and or perpetuate existing ones, because as long as we don't have the vocabulary to articulate what somebody who is down in Amelo, for example, is going through because of the energy transition, or what they're likely to suffer or lose because of this transition, perhaps we stand a big chance of perpetuating some of the injustice because we don't have the vocabulary. So when we decolonize environmental justice, we are saying, let's bring in the vocabulary that would talk to the realities of our people, and as a result, then we'll be able to talk to then say we talk real injustice, because real injustice will not be defined by you and me who are sitting in this conversation. Real injustice would be defined by somebody who understand what a transition from the current economy would mean for them and what it would mean for their children and the future generation, for example. Therefore, as the title of my talk is framed around reframing the narrative, colleagues, in conclusion, my argument is that this analysis, it prompts a deeper engagement with the complex root of the issues around the poor marginalized South Africans that are entrapped in energy poverty, and their lived experiences, and also their complex context. Because then when we listen to, for example, you sit in a G20, a T20 engagement, and you listen to and how energy poverty is articulated, perhaps as social scientists, then we have the place to come in and say, actually, poverty is multifaceted. So energy poverty we cannot talk about only in terms of lack of access to energy, for example. We need to also consider some of those intricacies and complex issues that build up what we define as a multifaceted concept of energy poverty. And until we do that, perhaps then we should forget about achieving a transition that is truly just and that truly translates to justice. And lastly, colleagues, allow me to end by saying, also, when we engage with this as social scientists, let then consider who are the real winners and losers. Because then if you just engage with these things at face value, perhaps it may tell you that everybody is a winner. But when you start to engage with the intricacies, perhaps then we have to be honest about who stands to lose, who stands to win, and how then, as social scientists, how then do we bring in that multi and interdisciplinary, and obviously the transdisciplinary lens to engage with these issues, to make sure that we, as social scientists, we not only write on historical things, but also we anticipate what would happen using the very theories that help us engage with the historical context to sort of then have a picture of what would happen. But also, I'm saying this with cognizance that unfortunately we are not operating in a closed system, and as for example the philosophy of science, forget critical realism tells us we cannot predict. And as much as we cannot predict, but we need to have the right engagements, because then if we do not influence policy, if we do not talk for those that have been rendered voiceless, who then should talk for them? Because everybody has their own vested interest in the transition. Colleagues, I thank you all.
Wow. Thank you very much, Dr. Moeng, for such a powerful and very insightful talk, I think, which quite highlights the complexities, the contradictions of the just transition. And I like the idea that, this kind of just transition tends to have winners and losers. And I think you had a very powerful visual of a community that's living in close proximity to, energy and energy generation, but they are so poor that they cannot even afford the energy that they are generating, probably as very precarious workers that are working in such energy companies, and that speaks to the Marxist narrative of alienation, and this does not only happen at a local community level or at a national level, but even at a global level as well. Like you rightfully highlighted, the geopolitics as well that's involved in this just transition. Thank you very much for that very powerful talk. Let me open this up to colleagues who might have questions, comments, and reactions to Dr. Moeng. If you have any questions, comments, you can raise your hand, and I'll be able to. I see Godfrey. Yes, Godfrey, you can unmute yourself, and then Tamuka. After Godfrey, Tamuka, you can unmute yourself. Then I see Crispin. I think we'll take those three first in that order.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Equally interesting. So I just wanted to find out from you in terms of the conceptualization of the idea of transition within the idea of energy. Where are we transiting to and from? That is the first question. And secondly, related to that, who is influencing this so-called transition? I'm calling it so-called intentionally. So those are some of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Godfrey. Tamuka, and then Crispin, then we'll allow Dr. Moeng to respond. Tamuka, are you there? Okay, so let's go to Crispin.
Oh, okay, thanks, Doc. Very, very interesting paper there. I really enjoyed the presentation. So my question is on this so-called just transition. So I just wanted to find out, can we really talk about the just transition? Are we not? Is this not just a sort of like capitalism that is trying to sort of like rejuvenate itself? It's more like a green capitalism. So sort of like, in a way, it's still very much this whole debate around a green sort of the just transition. Is it not really about sort of like a capitalism that is trying to rejuvenate itself? And then when you talk about decolonial, what is it, environmental justice, if you can try to maybe unpack that, what exactly does that mean in the context of neoliberal capitalism? Is it possible in the context of in the current context of neoliberal capitalism? that decolonial, if you can sort of like try to unpack it, and is it possible in the context of neoliberal capitalism? Thank you.
Thank you, Crispin. I see Prof. Chigwenya go ahead, and then Tamuka. I think you'll be able to unmute yourself. Let me attend to that shortly. Prof. Go ahead, Prof. Chigwenya.
Thank you very much for the presentations, which highlight the dangers that are associated with a minority group as we move towards sustainable development. But my worry then is as we try to shift and protect these minority groups, vis-a-vis the effects of climate change, which I'm sure you now embrace climate change as the reality that is among us. Can we continue like this while we suffer a lot of effects on climate change issues? I was thinking that if we could start to migrate right now on a small scale, right? Not as an overall, but as we move step by step towards achieving a green economy. I think that will also help us to enhance the future of next generation, and even protect the current generation from the effects of climate change. So I was saying, do we have an approach that we can adopt that will allow us to incrementally move towards green economy? Thank you very much.
Can I respond, colleagues?
Yes, Doc. I think you can, and then we'll be able to take the second round. I see Onalena and others. Let's allow Doc to respond, and then we'll take the second round of questions.
Thank you so much, colleagues, for those questions. I'll start with the question on where are we transitioning from and where are we transitioning to? That is a very interesting question, actually. Please excuse me. Because then I think in your question is underlaid by the understanding of it's not as much as we are transitioning from fossil economy that have contributed significantly to CO emission or greenhouse emissions, which is arguably one of the key contributors to climate change, towards what is considered more cleaner, more sustainable, more renewable, which would not compromise our environment as it already has been compromised. So that is what we are transitioning from in simple terms. But the reality of the matter is, and I think that's why I'll always say, as social scientists, we need to then engage further to say, indeed, what are we transitioning from beyond all these things? And that is why then I would always say, let's bring interdisciplinary theoretical lenses, engage with these things, because then when I was doing my PhD, for example, when I spoke to the communities, especially those in the Mpumalanga coalfield, some of them, when you talk transition, for example, they were saying that it's for them, it's not even about just moving from one energy model to another. They need a real total transformation, because then even if we move, as long as we still struggle with good governance issues, for example, they feel like that situations will just be perpetuated with under a new name or umbrella. So then perhaps that's why then within the bigger framework of just transition, we are not talking about just moving away from one model. We are also talking about how then do we facilitate a transformative path to a greener economy. Transformation would mean let's engage with the ills that are very rampant in the current economy. Let's engage with the ills that all obviously characterize the political economy. And that is a very difficult task, right? Because then I think over time I see how there's been a shift from that bigger framework to say, let's talk about energy transition, because it makes it clearer to say we are moving from one energy model to another. But if we have to engage deeper to say beyond energy, what is it exactly that we are transitioning from? It becomes very interesting. It becomes very complex. And I think over time, that aspect has been silenced. And I'm trusting that social scientists like yourself will then engage with that further. And then let's engage further on how actually we should be transitioning based on what we know about where we're coming from and where we are, what we want to go as a society. The second question was around who is influencing the transition. That is also very interesting because then like I said, I gave an example, for example, with what the statement that was uttered by Minister Gwede Mantashe when he said, as South Africa will transition when it's affordable for us to do so. In adding to that statement, he also said that we should not allow anybody to impose on us a model of transitioning. We should do it in a way that it is suitable for us. And over time, Minister Hosientu Ramokgopa also, he has reframed the just transition to saying we need a socially inclusive, affordable energy transition. Affordable, he's talking about what is affordable for Africa, not necessarily what the global north is dictating, for example. And that has significantly resulted in a shift from, I think at this point in time, we were supposed to be sitting with a lot of decommissioned power stations, but because of our leaders engaging and being willing to challenge the narrative and also advocate for what they consider a more pragmatic position. And then we see now with the new integrated resources plan, the timelines for decommissioning power station have changed. And now there's no longer, the talk about phasing out coal is no longer as strong. We are talking about moving towards clean coal. So now they're bringing technologies to make sure that the coal is no longer, the combustion is no longer resulting in as much emission as it used to be. So that then tells you who is influencing the narrative. And also when you think about it, that this conversation did not start in South Africa, it started at the UN Paris Agreement, for example. So I guess without necessarily saying it outright, I think based on that scenario that I've painted, then we get to understand who is influencing that whole debate. And somebody asked about green capitalism. Actually, that is one of the key vocabularies that scholars like Bond have engaged with to say, is this not another, a green capitalism, which has been debated in terms of when there's an opportunity for, I think when I was talking about the multi-level perspective, I spoke about the novelties that are emerging, when there's an opportunity for novelties to come and who is funding those novelties. Novelties in the context of the current debate would be the renewable energies and the green hydrogen, for example. And Patrick Bond, for example, and scholars like Koch, they're arguing then to say, is this not a different form of capitalism? And they're debating it. And I guess it's worth debating and engaging with it further, because then if we find streaks of green capitalism, perhaps we have to confront it. And some scholars already, because of the IPP model, it's called the independent power producers model, which has favored the elites over the poor. Already they are saying that already looks like an opportunity to just make money with a green growth narrative. but I haven't engaged with these issues much deeper, so I am not well acquainted to give a complete or comprehensive answer there. But that is one of the debate that is happening parallel to the energy transition, and scholars like Patrick Bond has engaged with it. So I would just recommend that engage with his work, and perhaps you would see you writing a very interesting article there. Another question was around decolonial environmental justice within the neoliberal context. Yes, very much so. I believe it is possible, because then if you engage with what I said, for example, to say we're talking about a place-based analysis, that is when we've started doing that. As an example, recently, as the University of South Africa, UNISA, we've hosted our very first Energy Indaba. And what we did in that Energy Indaba is we brought in experts from different sectors. These are people that have earned their stripes in the energy space. But we said we cannot only have these people debate what a transition should look like. We also brought in communities from the activists from the Mpumalanga coalfields, and it was a beautiful debate, because then they were telling them, come to us, let us tell you what a just transition should look like. And also, I think about 3 weeks back, I had the privilege of attending one of the ministers' G20 legacy projects in the Mpumalanga coalfields. And one of the things that he emphasized is they don't want to assume that they understand the realities on the ground. That is why they're gonna come and try and engage. But it's things that outside that, the vocabulary is understanding energy poverty and not leaving anyone behind. But when we engage with it using a decolonial framework, we are well positioned as social scientists to give them a better vocabulary, a more comprehensive vocabulary, like I said, to say it goes beyond just coming and understanding what my issues are, but also understand the vocabulary that I have used to understand my own issues, understand the complexities that define who I am as a person or as a community, and what I have lost as a result of the transition. And also, if you're talking to somebody who, for example, has been a victim of dispossession, a victim of grave relocations, and then you're saying, what is a just transition to you? Obviously, that person's response would be different from somebody like me who's sitting in Pretoria and can afford, for example, renewable energy. So decolonial in that instance, then it becomes very significant, because it offers us a vocabulary that perhaps we don't have if we engage with these things as we are engaging with them now. The last question was around issues around protecting the minority, and can we continue like this? And I think the colleague asked that maybe striving towards an approach of transitioning exponentially, and that is what is happening actually, whereby, for example, there was a shift from what, when I started my PhD, for example, there was a lot of conversation about an accelerated energy transition, where it sounded like somebody saying shut down everything and just move on. But over time, that has died down to South Africa saying, and Africa obviously saying, we are taking a pragmatic position, and we are going to transition at a speed that is comfortable to us. We are going to transition in a way that is affordable to us. And affordability to us would mean if everybody's gravitating towards solar energy, if our issue is firewood rape, for example, because people don't have access to cooking, perhaps our localized transition should look at addressing the local needs of our people on the ground. So I believe, therefore, that those are some of the significant strides that, as the government, it's already visible to say we are doing it exponential. We are moving, and we are not saying we're not going to move, because we have to move. Unfortunately, we have a global imperative to move, but we are moving in such a way that it will not be of detriment to our people. So I think that is now the general feeling around experts in this field, that we are moving, but we're gonna make sure that we're not gonna leave anyone behind, and we're not gonna leave people worse off. So yeah, thank you, colleagues.
Thanks, Doc. I think we can take the second round of questions, and I think we have Tamuka, Onalena, and then Edmo in that order.
Yeah, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very much, Doctor, for your presentation. I think it resonates with my work, especially my postdoctoral work, where I was looking at the operationalizing just transition in Africa project. I think one aspect that I thought is not being spoken enough about is the issue of AI. So I think I would like to coin my question around that issue. Like, as artificial intelligence is increasingly, governing the green transition, can we still speak of just energy future when the human, the ethical, and the local dimensions of justice are being algorithmically redefined and marginalized? Thank you.
Thanks, Tamuka. Onalena, I don't know if you're still around. Onalena, I saw your hand earlier.
Can you hear me, Doc?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Doc, for your presentation. I think it's very interesting especially because it's something that we've been talking more about in my class. I wanted to ask you to unpack more on using the vocabulary that speaks to the ones that are more vulnerable or to the poor, like you've mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks, Onalena. Edmo, go ahead.
Thank you. I think my question would be maybe moving away from the very local the context that Doc very much well articulated in terms of understanding just energy transition. I just wanted to maybe understand your thinking around the very idea of transition. Is it not under threat given the skepticism that we see, or climate change denialism that we see led by the most powerful states, specifically the United States of America? I think it has brought a shift even in the conversations around climate change, around the very idea of transition, even at a global scale, at a global context. Maybe I just wanted you to reflect on that. And the other thing is, of course, as African scholars, we will speak to our African context. But maybe have you done a comparison to look at what does just transition look like in other contexts, maybe in the West, so as to think about how does it compare, given the different kind of politics and optics of development. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Edmo. Maybe Doc, allow me to just throw in my question as well, abusing my position as the chair, because I think it resonates with what Edmo has just highlighted. And then I wanted to highlight that given the sorry, let me just try to mute. Given the uneven geographies of extraction, production, but also even consumption, how can this socially and environmentally just energy transition, how can it be articulated, especially across the global north-south divide, without necessarily reproducing neocolonial dependencies? And I think it's something that we have seen over the years from the Brundtland Commission, where this idea of sustainability was coined, up to even the COPs that we are having now. You still have this kind of north-south kind of divide. And I think that explains why maybe Minister Gwede Mantashe is sort of reluctant to ditch coal because of possible consequences, especially to the local communities, the local economy, given that South Africa is excessively dependent on coal for jobs, for foreign currency, but also even for energy itself. I think maybe you can take this, Doc, and if time permits, we can have maybe the last round of questions.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let me just start with the last question. Um, when one of the questions that I like that was phrased by I think it was Andre Gunda Frank in 1991 was the question of can we have equality? Can we claim equality in an unequal world? I think he asked what is the measure of equality in an unequal world, and I think that talks to what you're saying about unequal geographies, because then if we think about, for example, the debate about how as Africa, we've actually contributed like 4% to the climate change, but then we are expected to transition at a higher rate, which some believe it could be detrimental to our economy. And other scholars are saying, how then do we consider the fact that we are a developmental state? So then these scholars are bringing in the issue of South Africa or Africa as a developmental state, and how then do we make sure that we don't compromise our well-being in the name of transitioning, because then there's an imperative for us to transition. And taking it back to that uneven geographies, I think it becomes very interesting and very complicated if you think about it in terms of um the fact that we are a global society. And I don't like saying this in an academic context, but the truth is there are people that control the narrative. And as much as we may want to perhaps maybe be diplomatic about it but there are those that control the narrative. And once they've spoken, I think some people would say when once America sneezes, we catch flu, for example. So it becomes very, 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 very interesting, because then you see other scholars even asking, like the previous scholar who asked, like, can we even talk about decoloniality in this neoliberal context, for example? Because then you see how such beautiful epistemologies are actually, or theoretical frameworks, actually there's effort to render them powerless, because then if, for example, things are going the way that they're going, and there are superpowers that they can take whatever that they want to take when they want to take it, and then it becomes very, very difficult and very sad for me and you sitting in Africa, because then even if there's that unevenness, unfortunately, I think for me it's just that matter of, it's the discomfort of, if it has been ratified at a global convention, for example, like that it has to happen. It happens. It's very unfortunate, and maybe perhaps maybe the G20 will bring us something different, which I'm not very optimistic about, because then you listen, for example, to the topic around critical mineral resources. I had the privilege of attending the Africa Energy Indaba, and I saw how the conversation has evolved from that Energy Indaba in March and the T20 midterm conference that I attended, I think it was in July, whereby in the Africa Energy Indaba, for example, the conversation was around leveraging our critical mineral resources to claim our space in the value chain, in the renewable energy value chain, and how we are not going to repeat the same mistakes that we did, which were obviously what do you call it? Enabled by extractivism, for example, whereby the global north was just extracting an unsustainable rate. So then the conversation over time, in that, how many months? It's less than 6 months. It had changed to say, then how then do we sit together with the global players and find a comfortable space? And for me that said, perhaps even if we think we can leverage and do this and that, but because of our global ties and all these agreements that we are in, we still need to allow people to come in and take what they want to take. And unfortunately, I know I'm not being very politically correct or very diplomatic, but it's one of those sad realities which, yeah, I don't even know where as sociologists, as social scientists, we start even in trying to, we can unpack them, but I don't even know where we're gonna get to even with unpacking them, because that is just the nature of how the global politics are structured. That is how inequality has always prevailed over time. So it's a very difficult question for me to answer. But yeah, I think I try to just paint a picture of where I stand, and unfortunately where I get disempowered when you start engaging with the realities of some of these issues. And then it makes then you wonder why scholars like Andre Gunda Frank said, what is the measure of equality in an unequal world? Because then you cannot claim that Africa can be equal to Europe if whatever amount of decommissioning that has to be done in Africa has to equate that of Europe. It's not the same. Europe is way ahead of Africa. We know even the extractivism benefited Europe better than it benefited Africa. So it's those kind of politics which, yeah, I think, yeah, political scientists are better positioned to engage with. I tried engaging with them, but I just felt like, whew, yeah, it's a difficult one to engage with because of the reality of our global economy or political economy. And then responding to the question about global change denialism, it also brings in a very distinct taste to the whole debate, because then if you listen to somebody like, or somebody of Donald Trump's caliber saying renewables are a hoax, and seeing where we are, and then you start to wonder actually what is happening, because then you don't want such a vocabulary, especially if we've already invested so much in trying to transition, and then now you are told that this is obvious. That denialism, it's just frustrating a whole lot of things, but perhaps it just brings another angle that we need to engage with as social scientists, because then some things we just need to have to approach them from that deconstructive analysis or deconstructive point of view, to say, okay, fine, behind the veil, what really is happening, and be able to confront some of these truths. And I say truths in inverted commas, because then if then decolonial scholars are arguing that coloniality is it's the patterns that are still reoccurring through institutions, and is it not perhaps time to pinpoint at what these institutions are, who and where these colonial powers are actually, how they manifest, and where they're actually placed? And yeah, I think it's our responsibility to do that, but then it becomes very tricky. But as academics that are entrusted with the responsibility to ask difficult questions, and also teach our students to ask difficult questions, perhaps that is a very interesting and very good starting point to think in our effort to emancipate ourselves, to emancipate our children, and emancipate Africa, because then we would be asking the relevant questions, the very difficult questions. Unfortunately, we just don't know what would unfold from those very difficult questions. But for me, I believe that beyond just agreeing that these are wicked problems, we have the responsibility to engage with the wicked problems and say, how is it a wicked problem? Yes, it doesn't look like it has a beginning, it has an end, but how then do we engage with it? And if Trump is saying it's a hoax, how much of that how much of truth underlies that statement, and how much of Trump being Trump just saying that? So it's very interesting. It's very delicate to some extent, but yeah, it's those issues that obviously we have to engage with. And then you also ask about comparing just transition in the West. It's very difficult actually to do this, because then, for example, one minute there's this the West, most of this global North, they are transitioning, and they are closing down their coal mines, their fossil energy, and they are building whatever wind powers and everything. And then you hear a statement in, for example, engineering news that whatever country is rebuilding their coal generated whatever um, power stations. And then you wonder, because then if, for example, they're funding us to transition and we are transitioning, they're giving us billions to transition, and they go back and build, then what does it really mean? And I remember somebody asked a German a German scholar to say, but what is it that you're saying? Because you guys have been rebuilding, especially during the at the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, where actually they were taking a lot of first grade coal from South Africa, were exporting it, because then there was just issues with their relations and access to renewable energy or gas. So it makes it very interesting to see we are like there's we are moving left and talking right, like Patrick Bond would say. So yeah, colleagues, I don't know, but it's one of those very interesting. But yeah, I've never really engaged with it at that level, and I'm sure it's something that I will consider in the future. Um, Another question was around unpacking the vocabulary for the marginalized. This is very difficult, but it's very necessary, because then also as academics, I always there are scholars who always want to say we shouldn't make up the vocabulary ourselves. They know their vocabulary, so we should just partner with them in just maybe polishing the vocabulary. For example, a lot of times I think it's a debate that is happening in cognitive justice. I can't remember very well, whereby there would be people that feel like they're positioned to speak for others, and as a result, we end up using concepts like marginalized. But as long as we insist that they are marginalized, as long as we insist that they are voiceless, as long as we insist that they are powerless, perhaps we are re-rendering them marginalized. We are re-rendering them powerless, because then, for example, one of the most interesting and brilliant things that I engaged with during my PhD was how, just sitting with communities in Mpumalanga, I realized that actually they knew better than I did, because I was coming in as an academic. They were telling me their lived experiences and realities, and I was shocked to see that they actually have the vocabulary. Perhaps it's just a matter of how do I partner with them in enhancing that vocabulary and using it in a platform like this, for example. Because then if they have a vocabulary and it's not, as academics, we don't even know or understand it, and then that vocabulary, it's rendered, for example, vague, would say it's not scientifically proven, it's not this and that and that and that. But I, from engaging with this community, I realized that we have the responsibility to partner with them, because beyond what was defined as justice, they also had other issues that they were raising, and that felt exactly like real justice. But as an academic, I still could just be there to say, I couldn't have thought about this unless I had spoken with you. You understand your reality, you understand your truth. And as an academic, I just come. I may sound like I'm smart, but actually, you have the organic knowledge. And until I partner with you and bring in the book knowledge that I have, and then perhaps that's why then we need to start, we actually we asked that we're talking about indigenous knowledge systems, because then they go beyond old knowledge systems, but systems that are deep rooted in our communities, that communities have thrived through over the years. And then the last question was Temuka asked about AI. Temuka, I will gladly say I don't know, because actually yesterday I was engaging with a very interesting video. I didn't know that actually the data centers that we have, I think we have 10 data centers in the world, but the amount of energy they consume equates that of an entire country. And there is obviously investments towards building more data centers. And as a result, I think it was in Dubai, they hosted an Indaba around AI and energy, because then they realized that the amount of energy that we require, just to do a prompt on chat GPT, it's a lot of energy that is required. But also because of I think now I just don't have the technical language for it. There's new what do you call it, developments that are emerging in that, which they are arguing that it's going to start using less and less and less energy. But it's a very interesting debate that it's evolving very beautifully. I'm just not really acquainted with it. That's why I'm saying I'll gladly say I'll gladly say I really do not know on this one. But it's one of those issues that now we need to engage with it. What my university is doing now, we have defined 10 catalytic niche areas, and 2 of those niche areas, it's artificial intelligence and energy. And we are trying to also grapple with that, just bridging between the two critical, what do you call it, CNA, we call them CNAs, to see how then do we, feed in between the two. But it's, for me, it's not a turf or a territory that I'm well acquainted with. I'm actually just learning. And obviously, so far, I have not learned so much, but I'm already blown away by the brilliance that is happening in AI. And I really do not know what it means, if it's going to undermine the efforts that we've done so far in terms of transitioning. However, I am confident because of the conversation that was happening this year. I think, like I said, I can't remember if it was in Abu Dhabi, whereby experts in energy and AI came together in one room to try and find a resolve of what would constitute a sustainable way forward, whereby we consider what AI really means, what energy transition really means, and also just finding that beautiful balance between the two. Yeah, thank you. I hope I did not omit anything or miss out on your question. But if I did, the colleague who asked can just ask that question again. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doc. No, I think you responded to everything, and I think this would be our last round. I understand that we are now way over time, so this will be our last round of questions. And because it's our last, I will abuse my position as the chair again to just build on what you have highlighted, Doc, which is, I think, something that very interesting, and something that I've also been teaching in one of the courses that I'm teaching on climate change. And I think you talked about this idea of climate finance, as well as the transition finance. And I think we understand from the Kyoto Protocol that there are international climate finance mechanisms, there are international carbon markets, as well as development loans, some of which might be designed for countries such as South Africa, that I think is ranked 8th in the world when it comes to the usage of fossils, and particularly coal. But I wanted to pick your brain, Doc, with regards to all these mechanisms, these international climate finance mechanisms and carbon markets, and the loans that are designed to enable maybe South Africa and other countries to transition, with regards to how these possibly reinscribe global hierarchies of dependence, as well as limiting the sovereignty of local communities and other countries when it comes to energy futures. What are your thoughts with regards to finance? Because I think you presented it as an opportunity for South Africa, that this could be something that brings in a lot of money. But in what way do they reinscribe global hierarchies of dependency and also limit local sovereignty for energy futures? I don't know if there are any more questions for Doc. This will be the last round. Okay, it looks like there are no questions. So I think I'll throw in the last one. and then I see Crispin there. I think what I wanted to pick on as well is the idea of leaving no one behind. I think it's very powerful, and you highlighted it in your presentation. And for me, I always think of it as a rhetoric, just like globalization, that we are enhancing the connectivity of everyone, and leaving no one behind. For me, is something that is used as some kind of rhetoric, but it's central to global transition frameworks. But I wanted to hear from you. Do you think that this kind of narrative sort of depoliticizes this idea within the context of South Africa and mask, I think I would say, both structural and systemic inequalities around land, around race, and class, especially in determining who gets left behind in reality or in practice? Then I think Crispin, and then we allow Doc to respond. That will be the last.
Okay. Thank you, Doctor. Yeah. My question is on when you look at it, we this talk about what do you call it, environmental sort of like justice in the context of neoliberal capitalism. It's because when you look at it. When we look at it, capitalism as a system or as a model, it thrives on hyping our consumption as a society. It's sort of like it comes up with mechanism in terms of how to hype that. So because when you look at it, like simple things like that we need for our daily sort of like the things like now water, now like everything, how capitalism is sort of like in a way commodified some of the things that in a way should not be sort of like in a way commodities. So you find that, for example, I think when you compare like about 30, 40, 50 years ago, what an average person would consume, maybe it has gone up by 65% because of this sort of like capitalism. So in your sort of like model, what about the question around consumption also? Can we also try to, in this, how do you address the question around consumption, which is quite very sort of skewed, where you find that it is usually those in the global north who are actually consuming much of the much of the commodities that are accounting for this ecological sort of like in a way a crisis. So the question, what's your take on the question around it? Maybe we need to really look at consumption, how we consume, because capitalism is driven by consumption. They almost like commodifying everything, and then that sort of like in a way is responsible for this sort of like the ecological sort of crisis in as far as the drive to produce, and then which at the end of the day will account for the destruction of the environment, the ecological crisis. So what about the question around consumption? What are we doing with the consumption? What we consume, how we consume, and what we consume?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, Doc. I think this will be the last round. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. You just had to make sure that you ask the most difficult questions in this last round. Okay. The question around let me just see it. You've asked that question is very is packed. Hey, you speak about the finance mechanisms, which generally concessional loans in the context of the JET IP, the investment, the just energy transition investment plan. If you look at it, a significant portion of that is it 8.5 billion. It's concessional loans and so I think that also it's for me it's very problematic because then if we for example have to transition and going back to the history that I outlined earlier on about extractivism, a lot of tying it to what Crispin just asked. A lot of the consumption, the production that happened in our country, for example, or in Africa, actually was for the benefit of the global north. And then how then they have left. If you check, I think at some point we had around 6,000 abandoned mines in the in South Africa, mines that we cannot even account for because the people, the owners, they abandon them and they cannot be traced. And it means some of them moved back home to Europe. And if you think about it in that context, to say, this is what you have done. If we are having that honest conversation to say, this is what you have done, this is the mess that you've left us with. And instead of actually being held accountable for the mess, to say, okay, come back and rehabilitate the land that you've degraded. Because then if for example, if it's a matter of diamond, who's owning that diamond? If it's a matter of gold, who has benefited significantly from that gold? But instead we are, for a lack of a better word, comfortable with concessional loans. Who has to repay those loans? Are we then not undermining the very essence of sustainable development? Because then we can claim that we are developing and we are making sure that the future generation would not suffer, because then we are striving for sustainability. Yes, it makes sense. But then if now we bring in the financial aspect of it, it means my children have to pay for that loan in one way or the other. And who's going to benefit? If, for example, I think the Just Energy Transition Plan, and forgive me if I'm getting the numbers wrong, I think there was like a 500 was it million, that is, for example, for green hydrogen. Green hydrogen is going to benefit the European companies more than our communities on the ground. And then actually, who is benefiting from that very investment, but who's going to pay it back? Because then if you're going to take from the 8.5 million, for example, to say whatever significant chunk is going to go into developing green hydrogen, yes, you can claim that our people are going to get jobs, but then who is going to benefit? And who's going to have to pay back that whatever millions that were invested in doing that? So it's those issues that I always say, and until we confront and we are willing to grapple with, it's we just gonna we just leave them at face value. But these are issues that we really need to grapple with, because then perhaps we are undermining the very development, the sustainable development that we are claiming that we want to achieve. And also about the energy sovereignty. If now I define how your transition should look like, and I define the carbon credit model, and you depend on me to, for example, to ratify you. Because now if you look at it, even if you, I don't want to use company names, but if you want to do the carbon credits and whatnot, we don't really have a South African based company that does that. So actually, who is benefiting? So these things, they are so nuanced. And that is why I said then perhaps a theoretical lens like political ecology becomes very key, because then of its deconstructive power, because then it forces us to go deeper, to say beyond what we can put our finger on, what are some of the discursive narratives that are underlying all these debates that are unfolding. And I don't think a scientist, what do you call it, a technical scientist can do that. A social scientist is well positioned to do that, because then carbon credits, it's you buying credits from who? And who determines what constitutes a credit? Even the process of applying for that carbon credit is tedious, because they come and measure all sorts of things and everything. So somebody in Europe or in the USA defined how that should happen, and then now it's imposed on us, and we have to do whatever that has been said that has to happen. So it's very problematic if you think about it, but it is what it is. And energy sovereignty, yeah, that one it's something else, because then like you're rightfully saying, how then do we claim energy sovereignty in the midst of all these complexities, because some of these things, they really undermine our energy sovereignty. And if, for example, even the complex geopolitics, that if now we have to depend on the financing from other, we need that financing, but really, can we really claim that we have achieved that sovereignty? If somebody else is dictating the terms and condition, what sovereignty can we claim there? But this is my own, what do you call it, very limited perspective on it. And I'm sure somebody can come in and convince me otherwise. But from where I'm sitting now, I feel like debating energy sovereignty in the midst of this complex web, it's it's not it's not something that I can be convinced of at this point in time. And then you spoke about the global hierarchies. Yes, obviously, all these things, they perpetuate the global hierarchies. And then perhaps we need to be honest about these things and say they show us who's actually controlling the narrative, and where are we in that complex maze or in that puzzle. Are we controlling the net? Are we the controlled, or are we the controllers? Are we the winners, or are we the losers? So it's something that I would wish to not engage with, but it's something that it's very important to grapple with, because it's our reality. It confronts our society. And as long as we don't grapple with it effectively, at some point our children are going to have to pay the price of having to grapple with it at that point. And then you spoke about leaving no one behind. I actually I actually wrote a paper on that very question that you're asking me. Is it a superficial narrative or a true commitment to ensure that indeed people are not left behind? Because then if you read the literature about the transition in Nigeria, some of the scholars there, they talk about some of the narratives that the politicians are using because of their vested interest in the coal space, for example. And this narrative, for example, there's a narrative about the custodianship around coal, where people are made to believe, and they even use media to try and build into that narrative to say we own the coal, we don't want to lose it, but people are actually poor. We own the oil, we don't want to lose it, but people are poor even in the midst of that. So the people that control the narrative, they feed that into the society, and the society feel like, you know what, they have a sense of custodianship over this while they're not even benefiting much from it. So it becomes very complex, and you see that it's not only South Africa that is grappling with that question. You see Nigeria is also grappling with that based on the writings of their scholars like Osan Muyiwa, for example. So it's a very interesting one. And I think for the longest time, I was convinced that it was a superficial narrative. But then when you start engaging with, especially now leading to the G20, I think it's there's a beautiful and a powerful shift that is happening, especially with the work that Minister Hosientu is doing. For example, like I mentioned earlier on to say, I had the privilege of attending one of his G20 legacy project, and as much as it's not comprehensive, because then sometimes, scholars like Hall would debate the notion of exclusion, to say sometimes we exclude people on legitimate reasons. We would have a meeting and have it in town, and we know that people from rural areas, they need money to come to town to attend that meeting, but we'll say no, we took the meeting to them, but we know very well that they could not even access that town hall. We know exactly that they did not have food in the morning to come to eat and attend the meeting. So we have excluded them based on legitimate reasons, or whatever reason that may be, but that we can legitimize it. So a lot of times there are very interesting initiatives that are happening on the ground, but then sometimes then we have to go into the nuances and say, okay, fine, are people really what it I have I am are we buying into the notion of leaving no one behind? Because then if we look at some of the initiatives, they're promising, but I don't know. I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm trying to be optimistic and see, because then there's good strides that the minister has done. For example, the Mission 300, which is addressing clean cooking issues. It looks practical, but yes, are we not going to leave anyone behind? Is that what we are swearing by? I really do not know. The question about capitalism, Crispin, this is a very difficult question. And I'm glad it's the last question because really, you are right. With capitalism, we get hyped up, right? And from a place of having a form of we would never succumb to this, we end up succumbing to it. Because, for example, like you're saying, the commodification of water, we've gotten used to it, that we've accepted it, that water is a commodity and we have to pay for it, this and that and that and that. So when it started, it looked like it's not something that will stand, but now we even have wars around water to show that actually this has gone deeper than we could really just try to engage with at face value. So it's a problem, but because I'm not well acquainted with the narratives around capitalism and the complexities around it, I think then it becomes very difficult for me to engage with it effectively. But yes, indeed, I think we are sitting where we are sitting today. And I think in one of the slides, I tried alluding to it to say we are sitting where we are sitting today because of capitalism. And that is why then scholars like Koch and Bond are justified in asking, is this not a climate crisis capitalism? Because then perhaps it's just capitalism taking a different shape, or what is it that is happening? Because then you can see some of the patterns are there, and because of issues of commodification and we always succumb to these things. So it's very tricky, very interesting. And yes, we unfortunately have to account for the ecological crisis, the footprints and everything that have happened because of capitalism. But unfortunately, yeah, I think you're well acquainted than me. Capitalism is not going anywhere. And in the debate around just energy transition, there's been a proposition towards a social ownership model, for example, as a way to say how is it conducive or adequate to combat capitalism? Because as it stands now, for example, with the IPP, some people compare it with the triple BEE. So yeah, the BEE, where the richer will get richer and the poorer will get poorer. As long as you're not connected, perhaps you'll never have access to that. But it's just speculations. And yeah, I think as long as we don't engage and write on them as social scientists, it's things that society suspect that they're happening, but we need to respond by producing the right papers, but not only for academic journals, but also in the day-to-day readings of our people, where we start being honest to say, is this IPP model going to work, or is just another capitalist stance? Because then if we are saying nobody's going to be left behind, perhaps we need to make sure that we empower the people that have lost jobs in the fossil fuels, and say, then how do we then make sure they get access to wind farms and they're going to own means of production and be part of the private suppliers of renewable energy. But those are some of the conversation or topics that are written on policy. They're there, but the issue and the question remains the implementation. So yeah, I hope I tried answering, but yeah, I'm not well acquainted with that. But yeah, that's my contribution to that question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Doc. I mean, we really appreciate that insightful and powerful conversation and talk. And I must first maybe apologize as well that we are way over time, but it's something that we are passionate about. We have, I think, lost a few people on the way, but a lot of people have remained up to the very end, almost 2 hours. I think that speaks to how important and how articulate your presentation is, and how important also the conversations are. So thank you very much for making time to share your thoughts with us. And it's something that is also very close to my heart on issues of climate change and the just transition. And I really enjoyed the talk and the conversation, and we'll definitely call you again in the future to share some of your work with us. And thank you everyone who has also attended up to the very end, and for engaging, for listening, and we really appreciate that. We don't take that for granted. And maybe you might want to join our mailing list. You can share your email, and we'll gladly invite you for our future seminars. So thank you very much, and do enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much, Dr. Moeng. We really appreciate.
Thank you so much, colleagues, for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Prof.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, Tamuka.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. No, this was closer to home. I have a book chapter that's coming up, where I am talking about, the involvement of the community. Nothing for the community without the community in the just energy transition process. That normally when people talk about it, they talk it using a top-down approach rather than a bottom-up approach to this. They are saying that moving from coal to this is going to affect the communities, but without it necessarily